They said his father never existed, that he made the whole story up just to win a writing contest. A middle school boy, accused of lying because there were no files, no medals, no proof. But when an old soldier walked through the back doors, carrying a photo, a mission map, and a name only spoken in whispers, the entire school stood still. This is not just a story about a forgotten hero. It's about the son who carried his name, and the moment a quiet truth shattered the silence. Stay with us. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The wind curled through the streets of Pine Hollow, Colorado, the way it always did in early December, sharp, dry, and cold enough to make your bones remember it. Snow clung to the edges of roofs and schoolyard fences, waiting for the next storm to finish the job. Inside the walls of Pine Hollow Middle School, the heaters rattled, lockers slammed, and eighth graders shuffled through another Monday they'd rather skip. In room 204, where the smell of dry erase markers and old carpet mixed with fresh photocopies, a soft voice broke the stillness. "Matthew Reed, is this really your essay?" Mrs. Thorne, the language arts teacher, stood at the front of the room, holding a stapled bundle of paper in her hand like it was something fragile. Matthew, sitting third row from the back, raised his head slowly. "Yes, ma'am." He was small for 13, with dark brown hair that always needed a trim, and a face too serious for his age. His sneakers were worn thin, and his backpack sagged like it had lived too many lives already. Mrs. Thorne nodded once and gave the faintest of smiles. "Class," she said, turning to the room, "if you want an example of what it means to write with heart, this is it." There were a few muttered comments. A chair squeaked, but no one really said anything, because no one had really read it yet. But Matthew's essay, "The Man I Wish I Knew," was about his father, and it had made Mrs. Thorne cry. She didn't say that out loud, of course, but her hands trembled slightly when she set it down, and there was a look behind her eyes that said more than her words ever could. Later that day, the school posted the results of the annual essay contest. First place, Matthew Reed. It was supposed to be simple. A small certificate, a photo in the newsletter, maybe a free slice of pizza at the awards assembly. But that's not how it went. 3 days later, Matthew was called to the office. The secretary didn't look him in the eye, just pointed at the blue door with the gold plaque Vice Principal Karen Dillinger. Matthew knocked, then entered. Mrs. Dillinger sat behind a desk too clean to be real, not a single paper out of place. Her short blonde hair was as sharp as her tone. "Sit," she said. Matthew obeyed. She folded her hands. "Matthew, I've read your essay." He nodded. "It's compelling, but we have a problem." Matthew stayed still. "We couldn't verify any record of your father serving in the military," she said. "No file, no obituary, no news articles, nothing. He was special operations," Matthew said quietly. "They didn't put him in the papers." Mrs. Dillinger leaned back, lips pursed. "I understand the imagination of children can be quite vivid, but this contest is meant to reflect real-life inspiration, not fiction." His fingers dug into the seams of his jeans. "It's not fiction." She didn't flinch. "Then prove it." "I have a letter," he said, "from one of his teammates. He sent it to my mom after your father died." Matthew nodded. "And this letter, do you have it?" "Yes, ma'am." "Bring it in." She dismissed him with a wave of her hand, like a fly that had lingered too long. That night, Matthew sat at the kitchen table, the letter in front of him. The paper was yellowed. The ink faded in some spots. The signature at the bottom simply read, "C.L. First Recon. Thank you for your husband's sacrifice." His mother stood behind him, arms folded. "You don't have to do this, Matt." He didn't look up. "They think I made it up." She sighed. "Maybe we should have told them more. I was told to stay quiet. After the funeral, the men who came, they said his mission would stay buried." Matthew touched the corner of the letter. Carefully. "Not forever," he said. The next morning, they walked into the school together. His mother wore scrubs beneath her coat. She had a night shift coming up. She looked tired, but there was fire in her eyes. They sat in Mrs. Dillinger's office. The letter was placed on the table, gently. Dillinger picked it up with 2 fingers, like it might stain her. "This is touching," she said, "but unfortunately, it's not sufficient proof. Anyone could have written this." Matthew's mouth opened, closed. His mother leaned forward. "That's all we were given. His name isn't on any public wall. He never had a public funeral, but he served. He died for this country." Mrs. Dillinger gave a polite, rehearsed smile. "I'm not disputing your feelings, Mrs. Reed, but as educators, we have to follow standards. We cannot honor essays based on unverifiable stories." "So, what happens now?" Matthew asked, voice low. "You'll have the opportunity to write a new essay, one based on someone whose contributions can be verified. A historical figure, perhaps. If not," she glanced at her notes, "a 0 will be entered in the grade book." Matthew felt his throat tighten, but he didn't cry. He wouldn't. His mother sat straighter, and the award, Mrs. Dillinger sighed, "will be reassigned. By lunch, everyone knew. By last period, someone had taped a fake wanted serial fabricator poster to his locker, and when Matthew walked into his language arts class, Mrs. Thorne couldn't meet his eyes. She tried, but her face told the story. They'd forced her to change her vote. Matthew sat alone on the back steps behind the gym that afternoon. The cold had started to settle into the cement, but he didn't move. He held the letter in his hands, read it again, memorized the curve of every letter, every smudge, the weight of every word. A quiet voice broke the silence. "You okay?" Son Matthew looked up. It was Mr. Harlan, the school's janitor, Vietnam vet, quiet, limped slightly. "I heard what happened." Matthew didn't respond. "Mr. Harlan looked down at the letter in the boy's hands. "I've seen paper like that before," he said. Matthew blinked. "You have, Mr. Harlan nodded. "The kind that doesn't come from regular offices, the kind typed on field machines in places no map talks about." He paused. "You said your dad was Spec Ops." Matthew nodded. "What unit? I don't know. My mom never said." Harlan leaned against the railing, thinking. "Some names," he said, almost to himself, "weren't meant to be public. But that doesn't mean they weren't real." Then he looked at Matthew. "I need to make a call." The day after the decision, Matthew walked through the school hallways like a ghost no one wanted to see. Conversations paused as he passed. Whispers filled the gaps between footsteps and slamming lockers. His name became a punchline, his silence mistaken for guilt. "Guess making stuff up runs in the family." Someone muttered near the lockers. "Bet his dad was a ninja too. Real top secret." Another voice laughed. Matthew kept walking. He didn't look up. He didn't answer. He just moved quiet, steady, as if the hallways were a battlefield, and he was the last one left standing. At lunch, his usual spot at the far end of the table was taken. He stood there for a second, tray in hand, waiting for someone to scoot over, to make room. No one moved. "Maybe write an essay about cafeteria pizza next time." A boy snickered. "At least that's real." Matthew turned, tray trembling in his grip, and walked to the edge of the room. He found an empty chair near the janitor's closet and ate in silence. He didn't taste a single bite. That week, during history class, the topic was post-war American heroes. Mrs. Langston, tall and stern, with sharp glasses and a sharper voice, paced in front of the chalkboard. "Remember," she said, "true heroes don't need to be loud. They don't crave attention. Their actions speak louder than their names ever could." Then she paused. Her eyes flicked to Matthew. "And they certainly don't need imaginative tributes written by aspiring storytellers." The class chuckled. Matthew sat frozen. His face didn't change. But inside, something cracked a little deeper. At home, Things weren't much better. His mother, Grace, came home from double shifts at the clinic more exhausted than ever. She moved like a woman carrying years she didn't get to count. After dinner, she sat at the kitchen table in silence, fingers wrapped around a chipped coffee mug. Matthew approached slowly, the same way he always did when the silence got too loud. "You're mad at me," he said quietly. Grace shook her head. "I'm mad at myself." He waited. "I should have told you more. About him. About what happened." "I don't need proof," Matthew said. "I remember." She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. "I do too," she whispered. And then she told him what little she was allowed to say. That his father, Jonathan Reed, had left home when Matthew was 3, called into a mission he couldn't talk about. That 2 uniformed men had knocked on the door a year later. No funeral, no flag ceremony, just a folded letter and one last message: his work will never be public, but it made your country safer. That was all. But Matthew remembered more than she thought. He remembered the way his dad used to hold him always firm, always safe. The way his clothes smelled of sand and oil and wind. The sound of the metal tag that clinked softly beneath his shirt when he leaned down to say goodnight. And the words, the last thing he ever said before, walking out the door. "Son, no matter what happens, I'll always be watching from somewhere. You stand tall." All right, Matthew had been just a toddler, but he remembered. He always would. A week later, a notice was sent home. Mandatory parent-teacher conference. The subject: ongoing concerns regarding Matthew Reed's academic integrity. The meeting was held after hours, long after the halls had emptied and the heaters had shut off for the day. Grace sat beside her son, eyes tired, jaw tight. Across from them were Mrs. Dillinger, a counselor, and one of the school board representatives. The room was too quiet. "We understand your frustration," the counselor said, tone flat. "But this isn't a punishment. It's a correction." Grace said nothing. "We must maintain academic honesty," Mrs. Dillinger added. "If we allow one unverifiable story through, we open the door to all kinds of fabrications." "You think I made it up?" Matthew asked. The room paused. "No one is accusing you of malice," the counselor said, "but intention doesn't equal truth. So I'm being punished for believing my dad was real." Matthew's voice was tight, but steady. "You're being asked," Mrs. Dillinger replied, "to adhere to the same standards as every other student." The school board rep cleared his throat. "We're prepared to keep the 0 as is. If another unverified account is submitted, there will be disciplinary action, up to 1 week's suspension." Grace's hand slipped over Matthew's under the table. Her grip said everything her lips couldn't. Matthew didn't cry. He just nodded once, quietly. Outside the conference room, the janitor stood silently in the dim hallway. Mr. Harlan had been wiping down trophy cases when the voices began to carry through the vent. He didn't mean to eavesdrop, but some things weren't meant to be ignored. He watched the boy walk out of the room, head down, mother beside him. They didn't see him, but he saw them, and something old, buried deep beneath years of forgotten duty and polished floors, stirred awake. That night, after the building emptied and the lights shut off one by one, Harlan walked into the maintenance office. He reached into the back of a locker no one had touched in years. Behind the spare light bulbs and boxes of "do not use" labels, he found it, a metal tin, dented, rusted at the corners. He opened it slowly. Inside were names, phone numbers, code names, some crossed out, others circled, people he hadn't spoken to in decades. He pulled out an old flip phone, still working somehow, and dialed a number he'd never written down, but never forgotten. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered. Rough, low, familiar. Yeah, Harlan cleared his throat. You ever hear of a kid named Matthew Reed Silence? Why? Because he wrote something about his dad, and the school just told him that man never existed. Another pause. Then the voice on the other end replied, slower this time. Jonathan Reed's kid Harlan nodded to no one. He is. The voice went quiet. Then came the words that made Harlan's eyes close tight. I'm coming. Friday morning arrived with crisp skies and fresh snow. Pine Hollow's auditorium smelled faintly of polished wood and anticipation. Rows of metal chairs filled the space. Banners with the school's colors navy and gold hung above the stage where a podium stood, flanked by bright lights and a microphone that hadn't been tested properly since last year's spelling bee. It was awards day, the annual Voices of Inspiration Assembly, where student essays were honored in front of the entire school, local press, and a few proud parents. Everyone was already seated. The front row was filled with students holding printed copies of their winning essays, each smiling, some nervously adjusting their shirts, others whispering jokes behind their palms. Matthew Reed was not among them. He sat in the back row, 2 seats from the exit, a gray hoodie pulled over his head, and the letter from his father folded carefully in the front pocket of his jeans. His mother had offered to stay home, to write a letter, to keep him from coming at all, but Matthew said no. He wanted to be there, even if no one wanted him to be. Vice Principal Dillinger stepped to the microphone, papers in hand, smile tight. Good morning, students, faculty, and honored guests. She began. Today, we celebrate the voices of young writers, those who remind us what it means to be inspired, to look up to someone, and to put that admiration into words. Polite applause followed. Matthew stared at the floor. We had many powerful submissions this year, she continued, but as always, we could only select a few. She listed off the honorable mentions, calling them up one by one. Each name brought more applause, each handshake. Another moment Matthew had once imagined for himself, now lost. And now, Dillinger said, flipping to the final page. Our first place winner. The auditorium doors at the back creaked open. A gust of cold air swept in. Heads turned, whispers stirred. A man stepped inside. He was tall, older, with silver hair trimmed close and a hard-lined jaw. His movements were deliberate, his back straight. He wore a dark green military dress, uniform buttons polished, ribbons aligned, insignias gleaming faintly beneath the overhead lights. No one recognized him, but no one could look away. He didn't speak. He didn't ask permission. He just walked. Down the center aisle, boots echoing on the hardwood floor, past students craning their necks, past teachers frozen mid-breath, straight toward the stage. Dillinger stepped back from the microphone, uncertain. The man climbed the steps, turned to the audience, and adjusted the mic himself. He spoke in a voice that didn't need volume to be heard. My name is Colonel Thomas Rourke, retired, a beat. I served this country for 32 years, 5 tours, multiple theaters of war. I've read battle plans at the Pentagon, and I've carried bleeding soldiers on my back in sandstorms where the sun doesn't rise for days. He looked out at the sea of faces, still, silent. And I'm here today, he said, because you made a mistake. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Dillinger stiffened, lips parting to interject, but Rourke raised one hand. Not threatening, just steady. Absolute. You took a young man's truth, he said, and called it fiction. He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn folder, thick, creased, stamped with a faded seal that read, Confidential, released under special authorization. Rourke laid it on the podium. Inside, documents, photos, handwritten orders. A mission briefing marked Operation Raven's Fall, a map with coordinates scribbled in red. And at the center of it all, an old photograph. It showed a dozen men in dusty gear, huddled beside a helicopter. Faces young, sunburned, determined. One stood slightly off-center, taller than most. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes were alive, watchful. Rourke lifted the photo and held it up. This man, he said, voice unwavering, was Captain Jonathan Reed. He led that mission in Helmand Province in 2010. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options. He paused. 13 of us made it home. Because he didn't. The room didn't breathe. Rourke's gaze swept the audience and landed on the boy in the back row. And that, he said, is his son. All eyes turned. Matthew sat motionless. Both hands clenched the letter in his lap. His chest rose once, shallow and tight. Dillinger tried again to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Rourke kept going. You may not find Jonathan Reed's name in your textbooks. You won't see him in parades. That's the cost of men like him. They work in the silence. They carry the missions no one can name. And when they fall, there's no trumpet, no flag, just the hope that anyone remembers. He stepped down from the podium, walked slowly toward the back. The auditorium parted like a wave around him. He stopped in front of Matthew, eyes softening. This, he said, holding out the photograph, belongs to you. Matthew looked up, face unreadable, and took it with both hands. The room remained silent. Rourke turned again to the crowd. You rejected his story, he said, not angrily, but with weight. But you didn't just reject a student. You rejected a legacy. Then, one by one, people stood. First it was Mrs. Thorne, in the second row. Then Mr. Harlan in the back, a few parents, then more. By the time the principal rose to her feet, half the auditorium was standing. Some bowed their heads, some clapped slowly, reverently. Just a few wiped tears from their eyes. And Matthew didn't move. He just sat there, photo in one hand, letter in the other. Eyes locked on the man who had just resurrected his father's name. Rourke looked down at him and said, with a quiet strength that filled the room, his record may not exist on Google, but the man who saved my life is not a myth, and his son is not a liar. He is the reason we stand free, and I will stand with him. By Monday morning, the temperature in Pine Hollow had dropped below freezing, but inside the school office, the atmosphere had thawed into something else entirely awkward, remorseful, and for once, quiet. A notice was sent to every student, teacher, and parent. Official statement from Pine Hollow Middle School administration. We wish to publicly acknowledge and apologize to Matthew Reed and his family. An error in judgment was made. His essay was not only truthful, but a powerful tribute to sacrifice, integrity, and quiet heroism, effective immediately. Matthew's original award has been reinstated. His essay will be printed in the upcoming district newsletter and featured at next month's statewide writing showcase. To Matthew, to his late father, Captain Jonathan Reed, and to all families who carry silent burdens of service, we are sorry, and we are listening now. Matthew stood outside the main office, the paper in his hand trembling slightly. His mother, Grace, stood beside him. She didn't smile, but the way her hand rested on his shoulder said enough. It was the kind of touch that said, we made it through. 2 days later, the entire student body filled the auditorium once more. No banners this time, no balloons, no music, just rows of metal chairs, a microphone, and one middle school boy with a paper in his hand and something heavier in his chest. When they called his name, he rose from his seat near the front. He walked slowly to the podium. A few students clapped, then more followed. Some stood. He didn't ask for applause. He didn't expect it. He just waited until the room fell still. Then he opened his essay and read a single paragraph. My dad once told me, Matthew began, voice clear but quiet, a good soldier doesn't need to be known, but the child of that soldier he has to live in a way that honors the name no one else remembers. Then he lowered the page and bowed his head and sat back down. No speech, no correction, no grand moment of victory, just a truth, finally heard. And the silence that followed, it was not discomfort, it was reverence. After the assembly, Colonel Rourke met them near the gym doors. He didn't make a scene. He simply offered his hand to Grace first. You raised him right, he said. She nodded once, eyes shining. Then he turned to Matthew, and for the second time in a week, the boy looked up into the eyes of someone who had seen war and been changed by it. You gave him back to us, Rourke said softly. And now, you carry him forward. He extended a small envelope inside. Another photo, this one taken moments before the operation. Jonathan Reed holding a radio, helmet slung under one arm, smiling faintly. On the back, a few handwritten words. If anything happens, tell my boy I kept my promise. Matthew clutched the photo to his chest. Colonel Rourke stepped back. Then, without another word, he gave them a crisp, formal salute and quietly walked out of their lives. Years passed. The snow came and went. Seasons spun their old rhythm, and Pine Hollow moved on, as towns do. But in one modest high school classroom, something different was taking shape. Room 309, now home to Mr. Reed's U.S. history class, didn't look special from the outside. Old whiteboard, mismatched desks, a stubborn heater in the back. But step inside, and you'd feel it. A quiet respect hung in the air, like the kind found in churches or under old flags. Matthew Reed grew into a calm, steady man. He never boasted, never used his past as a badge. But every student who passed through his classroom left with a deeper understanding of what courage looked like, not just in medals or headlines, but in the invisible spaces where sacrifice lives. On the wall behind his desk, framed under glass, was an old black and white photo. 12 soldiers, dust-covered, smiling through exhaustion. And in the center, Captain Jonathan Reed. Beneath the frame, a brass plaque read, "Some records may be sealed, but gratitude is never locked away." Every Veterans Day. Matthew wore the same tie, plain navy, with a single silver star embroidered at the bottom. He never explained it. He didn't have to. One chilly November afternoon, long after dismissal, a young student lingered behind. She stood by his desk, hesitating. "Mr. Reed," she asked. He looked up from a stack of essays. "My grandfather passed last spring. He was in the service too, but no one ever talks about him. No medals, nothing, just stories." Matthew leaned back. "Sometimes," he said, "stories are all that's left." She nodded, eyes wide. "How do you know they're true?" Matthew smiled gently. "You don't always," he said, "but sometimes the truth doesn't live in a file. It lives in how you carry it." He tapped the side of his heart. "Right here." She smiled back and left, and Matthew turned again to the photo on the wall. He didn't speak, but if you watched close, you'd see him nod. That night, as the last light faded from the sky over Pine Hollow, Matthew sat alone at his desk, grading papers by lamp glow. Outside, the town fell into its quiet rhythm. Inside, a dog tag hung beside his father's photo, still polished, still sacred. And in the hush of that empty classroom, you could almost hear it, the legacy, still breathing, still remembered, still standing. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today, someone isn't going hungry. And sometimes, that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Grateful Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.